Welcome in, everybody. We're here. I'm joined by Ron Ace Sports. We're going to talk about week one college football. What a great time of the year. And I know week zero it's fun to have college football back for week zero. And week zero went well for me. But week one, what a slate, Ron. This is an amazing slate of games. Excited to have you on here with me. First, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kyle. I am equally excited to be on with you. I really like the new partnerships that are going on with college football and the content that you create and provide, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, so Ron is going to be doing a weekly college football article. The first one's already up at huntersportspicks.com. Check it out. Ron is a fantastic writer. He has tons of knowledge when it comes to college football and the NFL. I suggest read that week one article. Even if it's not actionable information for one game, it's something that you can use for notes going forward. Ron and I are both big on making notes and saying, let's look forward. What will this mean for something other than this game? I know a lot of people just want, hey, what's the pick? But long term in betting, it's really important to take note of certain trends and tempo changes, things like that. So Ron's got a lot of information there in that article. He'll also be starting doing an NFL article next week. I believe it's going to be a schedule analysis. Is that correct, Ron?
Yeah, it's still timely because the peaks and valleys of the schedule, it's not something that you want to get into from week 5 to week 6, week 7. You want to prepare in advance. Even with the college notes, I write a little bit on there. If you read it, it says things I'm looking at, because I'm going to look at that and put that into the equation for games moving forward. So the schedule analysis for the NFL is really going to talk about what looks daunting for a team at the beginning, what might look easy for a team, where I expect the team to be week 6, 7, or 8. What are the schedule challenges for a team like the Cincinnati Bengals, your Bengals, who are going from one primetime game to 5, and they're going to navigate through short weeks and exciting divisional games on national TV, and then the highs and lows that come from that. So I think an article like that really can set the tone for somebody as to how to approach a particular team or a particular week in the season.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm really looking forward to what you have to say about the Bengals schedule, because I will say the Bengals schedule is brutal at the end of the season. Certainly, I started looking at the end of the season and I'm thinking the Bengals better do well at the beginning of the season because there's a really tough schedule coming. But we're going to have a lot of analysis going up there. College football every week. Ron's going to pick out several games. I think this week it was 10 games that he gave some breakdowns on. And he'll have NFL articles coming forward too. Looking forward to that. Read all that over at huntersportspicks.com. We'll also try to do some videos here and there to mix and match throughout the course of the season. But Ron, let's go ahead and get into it here today and talk about. I want to start by talking about how week one is kind of unique to bet on because these lines have been up for so long. I mean, I don't know. These lines have been up since like May or June. These lines are out there so early. And now when I go back and I see some of the lines that were the openers, I'm going, oh man, why wasn't I betting that? But everybody has a life. Most people have a life, and you're doing things outside of just betting on sports. You're with the family. Was vacationing, working on MLB, NBA, things like that. It's crazy that the college football lines are out before the NBA season's over, but that is the case now. Like we said before we started recording here, Ron, the timeline has moved up every single year. It used to be like you could start early to mid-July, and then it's like if you start early to mid-July, now you're way behind the curve. So let's talk a little bit about, Ron, what do you think? What do you think about these games that have had massive line moves? Do you think that's more the marketplace just saying team A or team B was overrated? Do you think the betting public or sharps are the ones that are moving these lines? Like, how do you evaluate the betting marketplace for week one?
The initial moves tend to be sharp movements, guys like Brad Power and so on, who come in there and they pick off the lines that don't match their initial power ratings. And so you see an early jump. And then there tends to be some overreactions. One of the games, and it could go both ways, like we saw Nevada either cover or not cover last week against New Mexico State, depending on if you got 16 and a half, 14, 12 and a half, 10, all the way down to 7.5. And then, okay, so there was a 5-0 turnover ratio differential in that game. And a lot of people who bet late on New Mexico State probably got the short end on that one. But then we saw further movement where Nevada's line moved another 4 or 5 points against them from week 0 to week 1. And so some of it is a correction looking at the fact that New Mexico State outgained Nevada. And some of it could be an overreaction to games that haven't even been played. I'm looking at I think a TCU Colorado. And I think, Kyle, you especially and me a little bit, we're not high on Colorado this year. But what can we expect from a TCU team that lost a very, very strong coach over a 20-year period, Gary Patterson, who had his team always playing in-your-face pass defense and getting more out of this team, no matter what conference they were in. I think they were in 4 conferences during his tenure as head coach. There's got to be some drop-off leaving a guy who's coached the team for 20 years, yet that line is spiked up all the way to when we're talking about, is this a little bit too much of a line movement, despite the fact that Colorado may not be as good? What do you think about that and maybe some of the other movement?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to bet Colorado no matter what, Ron. I think that's a really bad team. So there's not a number. Well, I mean, of course, there's a number that I'd bet Colorado at, but we're not going to see a number that I would bet Colorado at. That's a team that I think is a really good season win total under bet this season. And I don't really like those season win totals that were under. It was under 3.5, which, you feel like things can happen to where they win a game. If ball bounces their way, that's a little bit dangerous. But they have a really tough schedule too. I mean, look at Colorado's schedule. Yeah. No favors for their head coach there, who's going to be on the hot seat for sure. I think that one is one where I wouldn't be anxious to bet TCU, but I couldn't bet Colorado. I think the thinking there is TCU's offense will probably score a lot of points. This is a Colorado team that wasn't great defensively last year, but they lost Landman, their star linebacker. This is probably going to be a worse Colorado defense than before. And their offense is obviously a mess. They haven't had any good quarterback play for a long time. Yeah, I think the Nevada one is a great example because now they're playing Texas State. Texas State, I don't think any of us really think Texas State is very good. They're probably better than they were last year now that they have a better quarterback who transferred in. But Texas State's defense is very weak. At one point, Texas State was laying points on the road here this week against Nevada. I believe it's mainly -1 for Nevada across the board now. The other thing about that game, Ron, that I'd like to mention is the extreme heat. It's supposed to be about 100 degrees for that game, 98, 97 degrees for that game. That's really intense. I think that's something to pay attention to. I don't know who that would help because Texas is used to the heat. Nevada, pretty used to the heat as well. But long-term, overs have done pretty well in those really hot games. I think the theory there is the defenses get tired. So we'll see what happens. That total has come down because Nevada was so bad on offense. They made New Mexico State's defense look good, which is usually difficult to do. But the other one that stands out to me that I'm kind of curious your thoughts on, Tulsa and Wyoming. Wyoming, a team that I'm not high on at all. I think Bowl is a good coach, but he is in over his head this year. This is a Wyoming team that had a terrible quarterback play in week 1 against Illinois. I don't think Illinois' secondary is bad. I think they're pretty good with Walters as their coach, but they're not as good as they looked last week. And, what do you think about that game specifically? Because is there a point at which you're like, okay, I'm going to take Wyoming, or is this one where you just would not be interested no matter what here?
There's probably not a point I would take Wyoming. You were correct. And I definitely lean the same way too, in that Wyoming with the massive roster turnover, losing their bell cow running back, et cetera, they weren't going to put up a fight against Illinois, who could run all over them. And it was worse than expected. And so now we saw the line move, much the same way we saw the line move in Hawaii when they couldn't get anything going. And, when's the last time Vandy scored 63 points in a 2-game stretch, much less in 1 game? So you're seeing, I don't know if it's an overreaction or a correction to how bad Hawaii and Wyoming really are. I have questions about Tulsa because they lost their defensive coordinator, and I need to know how that plays into effect. And I need to know if their quarterback is not going to throw 16 or 18 interceptions like he did last year. So as a fringe bowl team, just based on schedule, I'm not high on Tulsa, but I wouldn't be surprised if they took advantage of a Wyoming team. But it brings up another question that I would have for you, in that you have Illinois, you have Wyoming, you have Hawaii. Some of these teams, Florida State, for example, they played a game and their opponent has not played a game. How do you feel about that in terms of a team that has a game under their belt versus somebody who doesn't?
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to Ralph Michaels on Twitter at Cal Sports LV. He had a stat about this one going back many years. I'm going to try to pull it up as I'm talking here. But Ralph had this stat that a team with a game under their belt, most people thought a team with a game under their belt would be good ATS, and that has not been the case. If you go back many years, it was 43.9% against the spread, backing the team who already had played. So it seems that the team who hasn't played yet has film on the team who's played, and that helps them. This surprises me that it was so drastic. And like I said, I'm going to try to get the exact stat. Here it is. Since 2007, 43.9% against the spread. And it looks like that is about 350 games. So yeah, it's a 44% over that big of a sample size suggests that, I hate to disagree with that kind of data because it seems like it's better for the team that hasn't played. I think a game that kind of fits into that this week would be Illinois and Indiana, right? Because Illinois just played. The other thing that's a disadvantage for Illinois is they have a shorter week. They play on, I believe it's Friday night, correct? So Friday night here against Indiana. But having said that, I really like Illinois better than Indiana. I don't want to bet Indiana in this game, but it kind of keeps me off of Illinois, if anything. I do think Chase Brown is far better than most people realize. He's a very good running back. But that's one that I think is a good example of that. But the game under their belt thing did especially poorly in the 2020 year, which was obviously a very strange season. So I don't know if it's going to stay at 44%, but that is a big enough sample size that I would be a bit wary backing those teams.
I would parse it out if I could. What's the spread percentage of teams that won week one versus the teams that lost week one? And oh my goodness, we're 0-1, here we go. And like you said, there's a few teams, Florida State was an example for years, where they'd play a game and then they'd have to play 5 days later. It would be, Saturday to Thursday kind of thing. How would we parse it out if they had a full week between games versus somebody who had only 5 days or 6 days? But 300 is a large sample size. And the coach of Illinois, who you know well, he went on record during Big Ten media days and he said, I wanted that game. I lobbied for that game because I wanted a game under my belt before we entered into Big Ten play. So from the mindset, trying to condition these 18 to 22-year-old kids, maybe it's a good thing. It's food for thought. So I don't know completely where I want to go with that.
Yeah, it's something that's an interesting topic. It's something to think about. I don't think it's something that I'd want to blind bet either way. I think you and I both like to factor so many different things into our handicap. I don't like the trends where it's like, well, I have to bet that because that trend says that. I think that's just one thing that goes into it. And some trends are very overrated as well. Can't stand those teams 7-0 on Friday night games that start after a certain time. It's just ridiculous. So also a lot of times those go back 20 some years when nobody is playing there that was playing there before. So be careful with information like that. I do want to say we have a question here on Twitter. What about the Ohio State line move from -13 to -17.5? So we're just going to go ahead and start with the huge game, I guess.
Okay.
Ohio State goes from 13 up to 17.5. Sin City Sharp Basket, that's a justified line movement. Can the Buckeyes cover that many points? He says, I know they're your team, Kyle, but it seems like a lot of points. So I'll start on this one and say that To me, Ohio State is, we know their ceiling is really high. It's extremely high. They have great talent. Their offense is amazing. The defense is still a question mark. Like, we know it's going to be better. I don't think their defense is going to be as bad as they were the last couple of years, because Knowles is a big upgrade. But his system is complex. Is he going to be able to fix it right away? Not sure about that. I think that they'll be better. Now, from the other side, I sit there and I say, well, how many points do I think Notre Dame can score in this game? Because I think Ohio State's going to score. I mean, they're going to score their points. Notre Dame's weak in the secondary. That's not a good thing to have against Ohio State. I think Notre Dame's too thin in the secondary. If they can't get to the quarterback, I think they'll be in trouble in pass defense. On the other side, I think Notre Dame tries to do what Michigan did last year and run the football, use their offensive line to dominate the defensive line. They do have a good offensive line. I don't know that they can do what Michigan did last year. They certainly don't have as much talent as Michigan had a year ago. And I think Ohio State will be more prepared, or, be up for this game. Not that they weren't ready to play Michigan, but, that was a really bad loss for Ohio State. I know that didn't sit well. So I would think you'd get a good effort in this game. Ron, I think for this one, I can't lay 17.5 points. That's too many points to lay for me. Now you're taking a top 5 team against each other and laying 17.5 points. Now, I will say, if this was still at 13, I think I would bet Ohio State minus 13. Again, like I said, this is one of those where you say, oh, if I could go back and see where that line was then, I think that was a good bet. Ohio State's talent level is quite a bit higher than Notre Dame. I think Freeman will do a good job at Notre Dame. I like him quite a bit. He's doing great recruiting already. So I think Notre Dame fans have a lot to look forward to. But this is one where I think that the line has gotten so high that you can't take Ohio State. But I also can't really talk myself into wanting to bet Notre Dame. Now, to be fair, Ron, I hate betting Ohio State games. I've said this before. I don't like betting against Ohio State, because then if Ohio State runs up the score and wins big, then I'm kind of mad because, I lost my bet, and I should be happy because I'm a Buckeyes fan. So it puts me in a emotional state that I don't really want to be in. I'm already invested in the game. I initially leaned to the over in this game, but I'm afraid that Notre Dame will try to slow the tempo down as much as they can and run the football, use up the clock. That probably is the best try that they have in this game. So here, I don't have any real strong leans. I will tell you that I think TreVeyon Henderson is being overlooked by a lot of people. I think, Stroud gets a lot of attention, as he should. Smith-Njigba is a tremendous receiver. I think people kind of forget TreVeyon Henderson is a really good running back. So I don't mind a TreVeyon Henderson Heisman future. I think that's worth a pizza money type bet, because if you think Ohio State has a chance this year, I think Henderson could have a big role in their offense as well. But do you have any specific thoughts on this game? And what do you think of the line move from 13 up to 17.5? Do you think it's justified?
Yeah. See, I think when you look at Notre Dame, who was in contention for a playoff berth, one of the Final Four teams last year, you say, how can you hang a number as high as 17? I personally think the number came out low because the odds makers thought, well, we can't hang 17, which might be the true number. And for me, it's practically the true number. My number by power ratings comes out to around 16.5. But how can we hang that on a team that almost went undefeated last year? We can't do that. But the line corrected itself because you got a new coach. You lose your playmaker in the secondary in Hamilton. Very instinctive. They're going to, and, if you're going against Ohio State with multiple offensive weapons, you need somebody who's going to put the rest of the team in alignment, make a big play here and there, because otherwise, in fact, what I wrote about in the article that I submitted to you, I don't know how you stop Ohio State scoring in this game. It's going to have to be up to Ohio State either being flat or committing turnovers or something like that. I also like Notre Dame's coach. I think the line has corrected itself. I think because Ohio State recruits at such a high level, and Notre Dame too, and they're going to get better at that too, and they already have, like you alluded to. Some of the defensive players they already have were well regarded in high school, and they're going to be really, really good. And maybe it just takes Knowles as the new defensive coordinator to make a difference Who knows about whether it be week 1 or week 10, but somewhere down the road, he's going to make a difference. This is a clear no play for me. I just think the line corrected itself to what the power ratings needed to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'd love to have some kind of strong lean to give you guys, but I really don't think there's much to go off of here. Now, this is a fantastic game to watch, obviously, and we'll definitely be tuned into this one. But I don't know about this. Somebody else also asked, what do you think about the Texas State move against Nevada? I mean, we kind of touched on this one. Yeah, I don't like Nevada. I bet season win total under on them, under 5. I still think that's a good bet. I mean, you could argue that they probably should have lost the game outright last week against New Mexico State. I mean, I watched that game a decent amount, a really ugly game, not a very fun game to watch. I did have the under. So, you kind of like ugly games if you have the under. But New Mexico State, when they brought in Frakes, I believe his name was, at quarterback, they were much better. I think if he'd have started the game, they might have won that game. -5 turnover margin and still be that close is pretty hard to do. I think the line move here, though, is the question is, what do you think of Texas State? I can't be excited to bet Texas State in this game because Texas State, a team that's been pretty weak year after year. Their defense is weak. I know Nevada didn't look good on offense last week, but this is a game where the line move is justified based on how poorly Nevada played. The question is, do you think Texas State's worthy of being bet on?
Mm-hmm. Well, Nevada couldn't ask for a better slate games 1 and 2. New Mexico State was probably one of the 3 worst teams last year. And even bringing in Jerry Kill, you can't snap your fingers and think that everything's going to go smoothly for them. And Texas State is not exactly a barn burner of a team as well. So, 5 turnovers, that's worth close to 20 points in my book, 3.75 per turnover. So you're up to 18.75. So Nevada was outplayed. I think that correction has already been made. I'm not going to jump to play Texas State. Nevada with the new staff, maybe another angle that you look at is, well, maybe it's good for a new staff to get a game under their belt so they can see how their players perform, and they'll make some adjustments as well. I'm not high on Nevada. If I could have found more outs to bet under 5.5 and under 5 wins, I would have, but I ran out. And amazingly, some of the outs I had didn't post Nevada and UNLV season win total lines. So I was restricted there. Who knows whether that'll save me if something happens with Nevada. But I'm hoping it doesn't save me. I'm not high on Nevada. I hope they stumble here, but I have nothing good to say about Texas State either.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only positive thing you could say is I think Texas State will score more points than they did last year. Improved quarterback play. They'll play really fast. Bavital wants them to be an up-tempo team. It's interesting the total has come down here so much, and that's because Nevada was so bad on offense last week, but they again face a really bad defense. The total's getting kind of low. I think it's probably a little bit too low now at 51. Let's go to a game here real quick, Ron. I want to talk about Penn State and Purdue a little bit if we can. So Penn State, a team for me that they always have a good high ceiling because they do recruit well. They've had one massive problem for years in a row, and that's their offensive line is really bad. You could argue when you look at the offensive line stats that last year their offensive line was the worst in the Big Ten. I mean, just really, really bad. They've had good talent in the backfield. They have tremendous running backs this year. They've recruited very, very well there. So can the offensive line do something to block for this Penn State backfield? Because Singleton, Leap, I think they're really stacked in the backfield at Penn State. The thing that is also interesting is Purdue is so reliant on the pass, right? Because Brom's teams, last year they threw the ball 60.5% of the time in Big Ten action. It's about as high as you'll see unless you're, looking at a Mike Leach game or something like that. But Aiden O'Connell, I think, is a very good quarterback. I think he's underrated by many people. They did lose Bell. They don't really have a running game at Purdue. So I'm kind of wondering, what are your thoughts here on how does Penn State match up against Purdue here in this one?
It's a fascinating week 1 game. I like the fact that Penn State usually comes to play early in the season. They know who they are. I know who they are. You're right about the offensive line. Any run pass balance would really help them score more points. They're more interested in keeping the game lower scoring, in my opinion, than Purdue. Purdue, for them, their scheme works. I mean, they know what they are, and they're a passing team. And they go around doing it. They improved defensively last year, but they lost. They had a one-year defensive coordinator. He improved them, and then he went on to another job. So now they're going to a third defensive coordinator in as many years. And I was not a big Jeff Brom guy in pressure and close game situations. So for me, I would give the edge to Penn State because I think they'll be more fundamentally sound throughout the game. But the spread is the equalizer. They could win a close game and the spread could be in doubt because what are we talking about? 3 or 3.5 points? Is that what the line is right now? So, and that's where I see the game. Crucial game for both teams because Purdue on the quote unquote softer side of the Big Ten pecking order, if they get an early win to match Northwestern's early win, this race on that side of the division, I mean, it could be a crazy race with two, everybody's in line. But if they lose, it puts them behind the 8 ball right away. And if Penn State wants to go to a New Year's Day bowl game, they have to win right off the bat. Strategic matchup that I see because at Penn State, because of what you mentioned, I'm really charting what the running backs are going to do, especially one of the freshman running backs for Penn State. If he delivers, then my expectation for Penn State rises.
Yeah, I think this is a good game to learn something about Penn State. I feel like I know better what Purdue is than Penn State at this point. Karlaftis is a massive loss. Also, Alexander was a really good player on that defense. And like you said, the defensive coordinator did a good job, moves on right away. There's been some serious money on the under here in this one, Ron. I don't know. At this point, I couldn't take the under because I think Purdue's an over team long term. But this one's gone from 57 or 56 down to 52.5 a lot of places. So some pretty big movement on the under in this game. So we'll see how that works out. Let's touch on some more games here real quick. I'm going to try to bounce some off of you. I think are you okay with some under the radar games as well, Ron?
Absolutely.
All right, good.
I'll give it my best shot.
All right. So let's look quickly at Kent State and Washington. So Kent State and Washington. Ooh. Washington brings in Kalen DeBoer and then Michael Penix. Kent State loses Dustin Crum. I think this is an interesting game because in theory, Washington should play faster. Their offense has to be better than it was last year. I mean, they couldn't score on Montana last year, so their offense has got to be better than it was. The question is Penix going to be what he was when he was healthy a couple of years ago? I think that's a fair question. In this one, Kent State plays fast. They say flash fast, the tempo that they play out there. I don't think they changed that for one game. This total has come to 59. I'm leaning to the over in this game. As far as the side, I guess, what are your thoughts on this game in particular? And do you think that DeBoer can do a good job here turning around the Huskies?
They were a dumpster fire up at Washington last year. They were one of my very strong underplays last year for a variety of reasons, including the fact that in the strange COVID 2020 season, especially for the Pac-12 that got off to a late start, Washington never left the state. They stayed at home because of the California restrictions for COVID. So they were untested on the road. They had a defensive-minded head coach. Their offense was pretty stagnant, in my opinion. And despite having the usual NFL talent in the secondary, they couldn't get any mileage out of that. So I think DeBoer comes in a sweet situation for him where they can instantly improve just because of his track record and the way he could jumpstart the offense. I don't know as much about Penix. I followed his career at Indiana. I thought he was more of a possession type quarterback. I wasn't sure how he would fit with DeBoer. Maybe he seems to be accurate when he's healthy, which is only half the time that he's healthy. So I think there's things that he can do. I think Washington gets healthy on defense. They lost one of their prime defensive linemen last year to injury, Achilles injury, off a tremendous 2020 shortened season. Kent State is going to be breaking in a new quarterback, so that's always interesting. I would lean to the overs as well. I'm not convinced that Washington is worth laying over 3 touchdowns in this game, but I'm not convinced that Kent State can waltz into playing a West Coast game and come in without a quarterback and automatically say, "Hey, we're good enough to go ahead and keep the score close against Washington." So it's kind of a learning game for me. I'll learn about the pace of Washington. I'll learn if they can jumpstart the offense and the run game and everything else. I suspect that if things click for Washington, that Kent State's defense will be challenged greatly in this game.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. Let's talk about another game that is not as far under the radar as that one. And there's been a massive line move. We kind of wanted to talk about these ones where there's been a big line move throughout. How about Arizona and San Diego State? So Arizona, San Diego State to me is a fascinating one because I'm trying to look to see what the opener was here. I know it was much higher than what we are right now. Arizona and San Diego State. San Diego State just laying 6 points. I believe there was a double-digit spread to start with here in this game. So now you have Arizona with Jaden DeLora transferring in. Definitely an improved team. They have Cowing coming in at wide receiver. They have to be better on offense than they were last year. But I'm a little bit concerned, the line all the way down to 6. There's a lot of love here for Arizona. And I believe, isn't San Diego State opening their new stadium for this game? I think Snapdragon Stadium.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
which is disappointing because I live 15 or 20 minutes from their temporary stadium. And, to see a game with 20,000 fans, like I saw San Diego State, Utah, the triple overtime game last year, that was fascinating. You don't get that experience in 100,000 stadiums, but yeah, they're going to their new stadium.
Yeah, that's off topic real quick. San Diego State, Utah this year should be an interesting game because, Utah should have some revenge on their mind. I hope I can get a good number on that one, but I think Utah's a good team this year. We'll see how San Diego State plays going into that one. But what's your take here on Arizona getting so much of the money? If you look, 81% of the bets here on San Diego State, but 72% of the money on Arizona. So somebody respected with good amount of money here has bet Arizona. I do want to give the caveat that I don't think those percentages are something to just bet on, and I don't know exactly how accurate those percentages from the books are, but it's certainly been a public sharp split in this game, I guess you'd say. And it's the sharps don't win all the time. The public doesn't lose all the time. But what is your take on where this line sits now? And, in your power ratings, is this one now closer to where it should be?
Yeah. My initial take is that, Kyle, you and I have discussed offline about this whole transfer portal thing. And how do you adjust? How do you set an accurate power rating when a team like Arizona, you're talking about at least 10 new faces perhaps in the starting lineup? They devoured the transfer portal and bringing in new people and so on, because this was an offensively challenged team last year. I mean, completely offensively challenged team. They win one game against a Cal team that 30 minutes before game time, you found out 20 players were not dressed because of COVID, and they really should have canceled the game. They didn't have enough healthy bodies. And Arizona still only scored something like 10 points in the whole game. So this is a massive move based on projection more than anything else. And I agree with the line movement, but I think it overcompensated a little. I would have made the line 8 based on my numbers. And to be honest, I would make it a shaky 8 because I feel like I need to learn what Arizona is. What's the chemistry of all the new faces and so on? Yes, I think Arizona is going to be improved, but it doesn't take that much to improve from a one-win team of a year ago. We know, San Diego State is completely defensively minded. They do have a new quarterback, a transfer quarterback as well, so that'll be interesting to see if they open up their offense. But their bread and butter is won by how they defend the defense and how they stuff the run continuously. I'd probably be more interested in turnovers aside. If turnovers spike, that's a different story. More interested in what might be a low scoring, close to the best game, as opposed to the spread. I'm going to learn just like everybody else.
Yeah, we're about on the same page here. I had this at 7.5 in my numbers. So I think initially, if you'd said Arizona was going to play San Diego State, I would have thought maybe I'll be betting the underdog because I expected
Yeah.
the number would be higher than this. Of course, it was at one point. It's come down a lot. Braxton Burmeister, the new quarterback for San Diego State, I doubt that San Diego State will change their offense very
Yeah.
much. We've seen them just churn through different quarterbacks. Nobody's looked very good. Maybe his scrambling ability will help them quite a bit, but San Diego State's offense is not very good, and I don't think it will be very good this year either. But we know their defense is always tremendous, and they will be again. I would agree on a lean to the under in that game. I wanted to mention a little bit here about Cincinnati and Arkansas, if we can. I was reading your notes on this. I kind of thought some similar things about this game. So I wanted to touch on it because, Cincinnati last year gets into the playoff. And, as a guy that I'm an Ohio State fan, I would say Cincinnati's probably my second favorite team. I like Luke Fickell. It's fun to root for the underdog. It was discouraging to just see them just get blasted by Alabama as far as the offensive line of Alabama just completely dominated Cincinnati's defensive line. And really, Cincinnati had stopped the run very well throughout the course of the season last year. So you wouldn't have thought that was coming, especially when Alabama was not a good running team last year, really. So, Ron, I guess my question here is first, I kind of think Arkansas's offensive line this year is better than Alabama's offensive line was last year. Now, the caveat here, and this is a big one, they don't have Bryce Young. They don't have all the amazing receivers out there to keep them honest. But Pittman is a tremendous offensive line guy. This is a Arkansas team that I think will be able to run the football on a lot of people. I'm not sure Cincinnati can stop the run well enough here. It looks like you and I are kind of on the same page when I looked at your notes because initially I thought maybe I'd like Cincinnati when it was at 7. There were even a couple 7.5s out there. This came down. I see right now 6.5 mostly across the board for Arkansas. There was even 6 for a while. I could see a path here where Arkansas wins by a decent amount of points. And it's not that Cincinnati's not a quality team, but it's hard for a team in a G5 conference like that to lose as much as they did to the NFL draft. What did they, like 9 players drafted, I think, in the NFL draft? It's fantastic for Cincinnati. It shows how good of a job Fickell has done, but they have to drop off a decent amount, I think. So I'm kind of curious. First, do you think Cincinnati can stop the run here against Arkansas? Obviously, Arkansas lost Burks, so they don't have their star wide receiver that they had before. But give us your take on this game here briefly.
Well, first of all, you gave Nick Saban, 30 days to prepare for Cincinnati. If it was 1 week, I think he would have had a better showing from Cincinnati. But that's an aside. Cluster changes such as 3 impact guys led by Sauce Gardner in the secondary. That's just a big loss for Cincinnati. I don't know how they overcome it too. Can Cincinnati stop the run? I think they can slow down the run, but the bigger issue for me, somebody who's covered the draft, the NFL draft for 40 years, I hate to say it, is I like KJ Jefferson as the quarterback. I think he makes plays happen with his arm and his leg. He's a high percentage passer. His passes are not dink and dunks. They tend to go for 20 plus yards. I know they lost Burks. Maybe the pass sets up the run in this particular case, and it's a wear down the other way. Cincinnati is well coached. It just seems to me that going up against an SEC team week 1 with 9 guys off to the NFL is a tough bill. And then you factor in one other thing for Cincinnati. Are they going to improve over a sub 50% field goal ratio over the last 2 years? And, you go down the field and you establish something, and then you get no points out of the drive. It can be deflating, especially in the high variance, high scoring NCAA that we've seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years. I think overall, Arkansas and Sam Pittman, like you said, being such a great offensive line guru, somewhere down the line, Cincinnati's just going to be gassed, perhaps. I could be wrong on the game, but if I think Cincinnati's not ready, I want to catch them early before everybody else catches on, and I'm going to look that way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think these are two well-coached teams, teams that I would usually rather bet on than bet against, to be honest. So, um, another one I want to ask you about here, and I'm going to let you start on this one, Ron. I don't think this one was in your article unless I can't remember it. But how about Houston and UTSA here? Houston at UTSA. The Alamo Dome is a tough place to play. Houston has a really talented team. This line has come down from 6 down to 4 most places. Total has jumped in a big way. This is one of them, Ron, where if I could go back, I would have definitely bet the over. I think the
Mm-hmm.
over was a really good bet when it was
Yeah.
down at 57, 58. Now it's at 62. I'll probably pass on that. But I want to know your thoughts here on Houston versus UTSA.
I know Houston stumbled out of the gate last year against Texas Tech. It was really their only loss until the championship game against Cincinnati. And I think Houston has the schedule tailored for success again. UTSA lost some people, if I recall, and they had a great run themselves, not losing a game for a long time. I agree. This looks like a high scoring affair. I like what Holgerson brings to the table. He generally has his teams ready to go early in the season, especially offensively. Clayton Tune is entrenched as a starter there. They have a number of weapons. I don't have a lean on the game at all. I think it's going to be entertaining. I think it's going to be high scoring. I don't know. Some of these teams, sometimes like a UTSA, we saw this last week with UTEP. They have a breakout season, but are they really that good? For me, UTEP really scared me this season. I looked everywhere to try to find a season win total under 6, and I couldn't. All I could find was 5.5 and juice, so I left it alone. UTSA seems to be well coached. I think they're going to have a good year, but I don't know if they can match expectations from last year. I think Houston is a deserved favorite, but I don't see an edge in the spread.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I would still lean to the over at 62, to be honest. And that's such a high number that I hate to bet it. But Houston and UTSA both have weak secondaries. And I think both quarterbacks are capable of exploiting that weakness. The Houston front seven run defense is certainly very good. UTSA, uh, I know they lost Sincere McCormick, but Harris has been really good for UTSA. I think he's underrated by many people as well. This game, I think this game means a lot to UTSA because, the bigger name team coming in to play them. Some people would say, okay, this is a great situation for UTSA. Houston is more talented than UTSA. Houston remembers that they lost their first game last year, and I think they have pretty high expectations for the season. So, I think that's fair. I think at this point, the line is probably about right. I think if I had to bet something now, I would still bet the over. Ron, I want to get your opinion on Oregon State hosting Boise State. I know you're an Oregon State guy, so again, I'm going to let you start on this one. So, what do you think of the line here, which Boise State was plus 3.5, now most places 2.5? We've seen some money come in on the Broncos. What do you think of this game?
Okay, and like you, I try not to get involved financially on my home team, home quote unquote, because that was where I graduated from, and I enjoy following their games. I'm happy the fact that they have the right coaching staff in play. No matter what, they churn out running backs. They lose another one this year, just like they've lost almost every year. But I have no doubt that they're going to be able to run the ball again. What I see from Boise is a talented team that maybe their first year coach wasn't quite ready to be the head coach of a relatively major team. Boise State's been certainly in the radar, everybody's radar for 15, 20 plus years, starting with people even before Chris Peterson. 7-5 was a setback for them, their worst record since 1998, I believe I wrote. And they're loaded this year. They return more starters than Oregon State. They have, on paper, a better defense than Oregon State. Oregon State still commits a few too many penalties for my liking. I saw it in the bowl game. For some reason, they still play a little bit more undisciplined, but they're also a little bit more unpredictable than Boise. Believe it or not, if you follow the Peterson era, you'd say no team is more creative than what Boise did. But right now, Oregon State, with the way they run their offense, even a run play can be completely different from one to the next, the way they spread out the opposing defenses. I think on paper, this is a 50-50 game. It's important for both teams. Boise State expectation should be to win the Mountain West. Now, I know this isn't a Mountain West game, but you want to get off on the right footing. And for Oregon State, every game matters because their first 6 games are brutal. Games 4, 5, and 6 in the Pac-12 are all revenge games for their opponents. Washington, I believe Utah, which Oregon State beat last year, and USC, which Oregon State beat last year down in Los Angeles. So getting off to a fast start for Oregon State with a brutal first 6 games is not going to be easy. I like the fact that Oregon State has stability now in the coaching staff. I give them the lean. I think Boise has a little bit more talent, but I lean Oregon State winning. I have no play, even if I didn't have a vested interest in rooting for Oregon State. If I was a neutral observer, I couldn't play this game. It's on my power ratings. I think it's a fascinating game, however, and of course I'll be watching.
Yeah, I think this is that's a late game, so it's going to be prime time. We'll get to see this game. Boise State should be much better than they were last year. This is a team that underachieved in a big way. I think if this line were still 3.5, I'd be interested in betting Boise State in this game. And to be honest, if I still had to bet this game, I would take Boise State and probably just take the money line at plus 125. I feel like this is close enough to purely 50-50 that if you're going to give me plus 125, I'd probably take Boise State in that. Boise State returns 20 of their top 22 tacklers from last year. I think Boise State's defense is really good. The question is their offense. Their offensive line's been weak. Their quarterback play has not been as good as it should be. Obviously, those are somewhat correlated. I think Oregon State is such a well-coached team. I think Smith is such a good coach that I respect him so much that I hate to bet against them. So that's why I didn't pull the trigger right away. Also, Oregon State, I believe, covered every single game at home last year. So this is a team that's been very good at home. They do have a really good home field advantage. I think this is a fascinating game where we're going to learn a lot about both of these teams because Boise State should be very good. I know expectations are high for them to bounce back here this year. So looking forward to that game. Ron, are there any?
One more note on this one, though. In case people don't know, Oregon State's home stadium is under construction right now. So they're only going to use half the stadium. It's going to be a sellout. All the games will be a sellout, but it's only going to be about 27,000. So it's going to be a different alignment in the stadium. I'm curious to see how it looks. The big board is supposed to be ready today to go. So this new fancy screen or whatever, I don't know how that plays in, but we got a new stadium coming in Corvallis.
Nice. I didn't know that it was going to be half the stadium this year. So that's a good fact. I'll have to look at that one a little bit more and see. Ron, are there any, is there a game or two that you'd like to touch on here?
I think under the radar games, I'm going to look through my slate really quick. A contrast in styles, Coastal Carolina and Army. Curious what your thoughts are on that game. I mean, Army's obviously well-disciplined. If you're not ready to defend the option, you're in big trouble. Coastal's been a very, very good team the last 2 years. They returned their quarterback, but not much else this year. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not the rest of the team lets them down. Isaiah Lively, all he did was get open, not only in preseason with Baltimore, but last year. It'd be interesting to see what happens without their prime tight end target. You have any thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I was asked a question. A guy said, well, wouldn't Coastal Carolina and Army be kind of like a automatic under, kind of like an Army-Navy game is or something? But Coastal Carolina's offense is so much different than Air Force or Army or Navy that's definitely not an automatic under for me. Coastal Carolina does run some option offense, but it's completely different. It's nothing like the triple option. They spread you out. Grayson McCall is very capable of making plays. Now, I am concerned that basically everybody, like you said, basically everybody other than him is gone. I assume they'll have somebody good enough that he can get the ball to a little bit. Army's not a very good pass defense. That doesn't usually hurt them very much because they play so many teams that run. I think that could hurt them in a game like this. The money has come in on the under in a big way in this one. Army unders, look, I never hate Army unders because the way they play. But you do remember, was it last year they lost? I can't remember if they won or lost to Wake in that game that was like 70-50 something. I mean, just
Yeah.
what a game. I mean, Army is capable of playing these really high scoring games because their defense isn't really that good. So I would be cautious about betting the under at 53. I think that's getting pretty low. As far as the side, boy, I tell you, I hate to bet on this game as well. This is one, Ron, where I'm going to take some notes and learn about these
Yeah.
teams for the next week. I guess I would lean to Army just because they have a lot more returning than does Coastal Carolina, but nothing really strong for me in that one. I think that's a fascinating game, though, because it's a Coastal Carolina team that really there's a lot of unknowns about going into the season.
I would probably lean Army, and I would lean the over in this game just in case Coastal's defense gets shredded by Army's disciplined attack, and then they'd have to go on the offensive and to throw balls. Of course, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is look at the weather before you do anything, because weather can be unpredictable even in early September. We know there's been flooding in a lot of different areas. I don't know how your area got hit, but flying out of Pittsburgh, visiting the family last week, we were delayed by thunderstorms, so it could hit anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, Ron. And usually, I think some people get annoyed by how much I talk about the weather when it comes to college football. But I will say, I honestly think that's one of my single best angles that's helped me over the years, especially betting totals. I think many people underrate how much it means the weather when it comes to a college football game. And that's not just totals, also with sides, it could affect some teams more than others. And obviously there's a correlation between lower scoring games and taking the underdog. So that's something to keep an eye on for sure. Other than that, Ron, let's touch on real quickly Florida State and LSU, since it's a kind of standalone game that night. I know there's Western Kentucky and Hawaii, but we can skip over that one. I'm not too excited to talk about Hawaii. Florida State and LSU. I'm curious your thoughts on this. When I looked at your notes here, I think you had a stronger opinion on this game than I do. And which game is this? Which team is this a more important game for as far as the head coaching staff? You got Brian Kelly coming in. Expectations are certainly high at LSU. I mean, they fired Orgeron after he had won a title a couple years before. Then you have Norvell, who's been on the hot seat for a while. Who does this game mean more to, first of all? I think as far as the coaching staffs.
Florida State by far, in my opinion. Norvell can't survive even a 6-6 season. They're loaded defensively to stop the run, in my opinion. They have enough quarterback experience. You can't read anything from last week's game, but they did have 3 running backs explode against a far weaker Duquesne team. But basically, I would be, if I were a Florida State fan, disappointed if they lost this game with LSU having, I know Brian Kelly went berserk over the transfer portal, and they're going to be a better coach team, and they're going to be a more complete team. But week 1, how does it all come together? I would be vastly disappointed if I were a Florida State fan and they couldn't win week 1 in this game.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is a good opportunity for them. Obviously, they go into a tough environment, basically playing a road game. But, Florida State, they have improved. Jordan Travis has been pretty good at quarterback for them. If they can have just enough of a passing game, he's very good running. So I think that'll be a fascinating game. And then Clemson and Georgia Tech, nothing too exciting about that game. I think the line move toward the under makes a lot of sense to me in that game. Now, it depends on what you think of Clemson long-term on offense. But that kind of segues us here into something I want to finish up with here, Ron. I know you wanted to mention like maybe some underrated teams or who might sneak into the playoffs. We've got Ohio State is the second one. Bama is the first team. Georgia probably a third team there. Now, as a Buckeyes fan, I don't want to just assume that they're going to be there, but those are the top teams going into the season. But like you said before, when we were talking before we started recording here, Ron, that 4th spot's wide open. So how do you kind of view that as far as teams that at least have a chance, like that have the high ceiling?
Well, I mean, you're looking at the usual suspects. Clemson loses both coordinators for the first time in a long time. Notre Dame is under a coaching change. They lost a running back. They lost Kyle Hamilton, in the secondary. They have a question. Michigan lost a lot of talent as well. Did they lose one of their coordinators? Am I correct in that? Not sure about that. And they have to go to Ohio State, which is and a crazy revenge game for Ohio State. Those two teams, as you know, do not like each other. So if you're looking beyond the usual suspects, I'm looking at teams that have high variance. A team like Miami of Florida, they have another coaching change. They've recruited, they've used the transfer portal. They just haven't put it all together for 12 weeks in the season. They face the softer division in the ACC. Basically, Pittsburgh is loaded, but they have a new quarterback, a transfer quarterback. To me, it's between Miami and Pittsburgh to win that side. And then they have a one-game playoff, and maybe they sneak into the Final Four. Maybe they fall flat on their face, but there's some value there. Some people like Tennessee as an ascending team, also in a division where Georgia, we talked about, lost 15 starters to the NFL alone. Florida's under new management. The other teams are kind of spinning their wheels. Maybe Kentucky deserves better than that as a 7, 8, 9 win type team, but they're missing some players as well. How about USC? How do we evaluate USC, who basically has a completely new team? Jordan Addison comes over. They have a new quarterback. They have new coaching. I think the defense is pretty thin. I think if they avoid injury, because USC is going to be dead if they have injuries this year. They have no team depth, in my opinion, especially defensively. But who's to say that they can't come in and be that 10 or 11 win team? It's just so wide open for that fourth spot that I'm looking for an outlier. And those are the teams that immediately come to mind.
Yeah. I think people have gotten so high on USC now that it's hard for me to power rate USC as high as what the odds makers and the betting marketplace have them now. I mean, I know they have a good coach. I know they brought in a lot of talent, but like you said, their depth is not where it needs to be. I've seen respected people taking USC under 9.5 wins, and I can't blame them on that. I didn't bet that, but high expectations for USC. Certainly they have a high ceiling, but I think that they're rated very highly now. I kind of like the thought of Miami. Miami is a team that kind of going under the radar, Ron. I don't think there's been that much talk about them compared to what you would expect from the U. Van Dyke's a really good quarterback, good coaching hire. I think they're recruiting very well. Their depth is pretty good. So I kind of like that thought, especially if you think that Clemson is not tremendous like they used to be. They're at least down from where they used to be. Now, as far as the fourth team, Utah would be one that I would consider that could be in the playoff. Trusting the Pac-12 has not been a great idea in the past. So I don't know that I'm going to put money on it, but I like Kyle Whittingham. I think he's a really good coach. By the end of the year, they're always playing good football. So Utah obviously has a massive game this week. They really need to win that game at Florida with a lot of turnover and a good new coach. But Utah would be one I would think about there. I like the Miami thought for the fourth spot. And, I think it'll be fascinating to see who can jump into that role. The marketplace will adjust itself, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about this in the future. And I'm looking forward to some of your articles where we can kind of talk about where weeks 2 and 3 and 4, you can see some of those overreactions, right? So you see both in college football and the NFL, like, oh, geez, they had one good game and now everybody thinks this is an amazing team, or they had one bad game and all the priors are just thrown out the window. And we just assume that this team is either great or terrible. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, Ron, thanks for joining me here today. And I appreciate you joining in to do the content there at huntersportspicks.com. So everybody check out the work there at huntersportspicks.com. I also want to give a shout out to Sports Wagering U. Check out the Sports Wagering U. There's a couple college football classes up. I did have one of those that was about turnover in the offseason and looking for new coaching changes and rosters. That's what I always do. The first teams that I power rate are always the ones that have new coaches or new coordinators, because I think that's where there's the biggest edges. So look for that, see my thoughts on that one. And I also want to give a shout out to Ron and Las Vegas Chris's shows that they've been doing on YouTube. I know you guys have done some. I've gotten to see a couple of those. I know you did a great one there with Brad Powers. Some really good shows that are really good long-term content. So I think you guys have had a lot of fun doing those shows as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, God, we had a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, especially on Chris's part, setting it up and getting the guests. And those we tried to script, make sure we asked questions that weren't asked anywhere else.
Mhm.
And we got some heavyweights. We just sat back and took our own notes from them. Like I said on the shows, it reconfirmed some of the work that I do in April, May, June, July, August as a one sport guy for me. That all the work and all the kinds of things that I do are reinforced by the heavyweights in the industry. And I hope that that kind of summer series is something that we just turn it back on each summer. People can learn from one after another. We're getting into the weekly content now. The season's about to start, NFL and college. But that series hopefully will live on, and we take pride in what we did in that one.
Yeah, definitely. Two really sharp guys and some great guests there. I think it's also important to point out that while a lot of people just love the free picks and say, "Give me a pick, I want to know what's going to win," long term, you're going to get more from the finding out how to use the betting process and fixing the way you go about betting than you are from somebody just spoon feeding you something on a podcast or video. So definitely pay attention to that and try to improve your college football or NFL handicapping going forward. And hopefully Ron's articles can help with that as well over at huntersportspicks.com. But again, Ron, thanks for joining me here today. Certainly appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Look forward to doing some more and love your work. And hopefully we can bounce ideas off one another, and look forward to having a very exciting college football season. It's here. It's back. Summer's over.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks again, Ron. And everybody, if you could subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, follow Ron over at Ron A Sports and me at Kyle Hunter Picks. Everybody have a great week one. Looking forward to the college football action.